It's all about how you respond to modernity. Do you respond to modernity through, and for lay people who are connected to the Enlightenment, but are clearly very Jewish. It's hard not to be in 1810. There's going to be more Reformation for an Orthodox rabbi in 1810 or 1820. If they may truly feel, and you see this over and over again in the writing of Rabbi Chorin, the synagogue's a balagan, people don't know what they're saying, right? And he's got good points. It's not just about like, we want to be Germans. It's much more than that. I think his criticisms are it's no different than today. Our arguments over whatever it is, women's learning, women's leadership, it was just different issues today. They didn't have, that just wasn't their issue. Their issue was how much is a Jew a part of the modern era. The other kind of response to modernity, of course, is the opposite. Is more insularity and fighting against that out of the fears, and that's of course what Chassam Sofer is famous for. So I came across two things that I think will be interesting. Because again, I'm thinking sort of moving away from Rabbi Chorin, sort of done him. So one is earlier on in 1812, the very beginnings of reform really begin a little bit earlier than Hamburg, sort of. It depends how you label it. But there are reformations that are happening in Germany, in Westphalia and in Berlin. And mostly begins with a person named Israel Jacobson, who is a lay person, who's wealthy, who's very connected to the government. And the government, the new government, I think post-Napoleon, wants to have a sort of a hand on the Jewish community. And they create something called the consistory, which existed also in France and in other places. And it's kind of a religious body that answers to the government for the Jews. And so who's going to be on that? Well, in 1812, or 1810, that's going to be Orthodox Jews. But they're appointed by this person, Israel Jacobson, who's kind of the very, very beginning of Reform Judaism. He creates a school in Westphalia that has, I think, boys and girls and secular studies. And then he creates a kind of temple, what he calls a temple. And the differences are very slight. And that's what we could look at that. And this is even earlier than the Hamburg Temple. And one of the people that he elects 3 rabbis to this consistory. They're, of course, Orthodox rabbis, extremely learned. One of them is a rabbi named Rabbi Menachem Mendel Steinhardt. And he is called Hagon, Harav, the great one, the great rabbi. There's no question about his orthodoxy and his learnedness. But again, I think what's interesting for us about somebody like that is he is open-minded, much, much more than somebody like Chassam Sofer, who's not open-minded at all to these things, to reforms in prayer. It's interesting that one of the very early things, and we saw this in, I think, Rabbi Moshe Kunitz's writing, is the question of kitniot. Kitniot almost seems to come up as the issue even before prayer reform. Can you permit, and they start by permitting it for soldiers. That's what happens around that era. And there are halachic grounds for that, but it's seen as a slippery slope. And so he writes basically a tshuva permitting kitniot for these soldiers and for people who are very poor because they just don't have enough matzah. There's even in the argument that trying to make enough matzah is going to create chametz, matzah that's chametz. But then very, very quickly, it becomes adapted for everybody, not just for the soldiers. And it seems like overnight, there's a sense of permission to eat kitniot. And even though that's a very late minhag, it's a custom that emerges, 1,000 years ago, it's seen almost as, at least in that period, it's seen almost as like the canary in the coal mine for Reformation. Which is interesting because it's really reared its head. Like everybody thinks, right now in Israel, this is a very big question. I think among Ashkenazim, there's a sense that, in 20 years, Ashkenazim will be eating kitniot in Israel because Sephardim eat it. And you could say better, Jonah, but think there's a sense that, that kitniot is like a lot. In America, I don't think that's going to happen for a long time. But my sense is that in Israel, it's much more tenuous, the keeping of kitniot. Is that right? I mean, there's Orthodox rabbis who are arguing, I think, Ashkenazi. So that was a very early radical move, but then he also writes about this rabbi in 1812 in Westphalia, who's really the very beginning of Reformation. Maybe, I mean, that it's a hard, you can't really call him a reformer, but he does write a letter to a friend of his about wanting to permit some changes in the liturgy, especially. It seems like it's more for like a school, like a kid's school, but it's seen also as a kind of reformation. And it's in a book called Divrei Igeret, which is called Divrei Igeret because it was really written as a letter. Now you can see that he's a traditionalist, because where did I get this from? Hebrew Books. Hebrew Books does not have the books of, for instance, Rabbi Chorin, or at least his later books. And you can see this, most of the books in Hebrew Books come from this enormous library that the Chabad had, the sixth large rabbi. And so why don't I just do this? There's also, I found about 10 tshuvas in the Chassam Sofer that are actually letters recorded to the Chassam Sofer and from the Chassam Sofer about the issues regarding mostly Rabbi Chorin and others in 1820. But maybe we'll take a look at this, because this brings us even earlier, brings us about 10 years earlier to maybe an even an even more seminal moment in reform. And it's, again, the earlier you go, it's Orthodox rabbis, of course, which is why I think it's a bit interesting. Okay, let me share my screen with you. Okay, so this is the book. So he wrote Divrei Menachem, which is an accepted book of Tshuvot that was published in the turn of the 18th century. Hagon Moreno Harav Mendel Steinhardt, and you can see here Consistoralia Av Bezdin Westphalia. So he's one of the members of the Consistoria, which is this government body, this Jewish government liaison body, and he is the Av Bezdin. Westphalia is a whole area of Germany, the Rhine. It includes much of the Rhine. Alodot Eze Heterim, the Tikunot, and this is regarding Heterim, leniencies, and fixes Ashayistu HaChachamim HaRabbanim Andrzaria, that the three rabbis of the Consistoria have created in Westphalia. And this is 1812. Taf Kuf Ayin Beis. And you can see the person who published it is Heidenheim, who was a very close friend, it seems, of Rabbi Steinhardt. But the thing is that it's not clear Rabbi Steinhardt told him he could publish it. It seems that Rabbi Steinhardt sent this as a letter to Heidenheim, but that it wasn't necessarily supposed to be published. And you can see in the introduction, this is from Heidenheim. And then there's an introduction from Rabbi Steinhardt. They live in Kassel. Kassel is one of the cities in Westphalia. And that's where the Reform, in quotes, had created a school. And the first temple was in Kassel in 1812. Now, what did that mean, a temple? Again, it was really, I think, just having, I think it was a choir and moving the beam. So he says, Mincha Shtucha Hi Elaya Megillah. So he says, this is Heidenheim writing. Megillah was sent to me. This book was sent to me, this paper. Katana B'Musa, it's small, but it's wondrous in its content. Mikadosh Echad, from one holy man. The Dever Lamantilas Hashem was speaking for the praises of God, for God's holiness. That is Rabbi Mendel Steinhardt. V'im mitnaged el ritzonahu, and if it is against his will, as he wrote, Lishloch b'Yakov devar v'anachluchim b'nin heter mini kitnios pesach lioter. If he doesn't want me to spread the word about this, about what he's written here, which is permitting kitniot and other reforms, takanot chavoret hanitzavim nikraim al shem konstaria in Kassel, v'dinu mahagam lefitzim b'Yisrael. V'hinei b'ashkafa rishona kemachshavutav machshavotai. So at first glance, he says, of course, whatever his opinion is, my friend, that's what I'm going to do. And I agree with him. I understand his fear that people are going to attack him. Rabim hamagadlim alehem binyanem ha'el, achlaman hakanim v'lolaman adar yakar Torah Hashem. He says the people that attack because they are zealous, not necessarily because they want the best for Torah. Rotam chosen mifalot divrei Elokim chayim v'divrei chen picha chamazeh yirtzu la'asot gamhem v'latehem kein lister lahashchis devarav hanimim. They want to destroy his nice words. V'yakar asher lo yochlo, when they're not able, yifnu v'chanu yav liftot et hamon beit Yisrael b'derech akash v'akov v'terev hamachashala kachal hem machshvatai tchila. Not sure exactly what he means by that. Amnam achrei chakor. So far the argument seems to be not to publish this because his friend doesn't want him to, who wrote it. Amnam achrei chakor davar lo shom matzati. But after I thought about it, I realized ki yesharim darkei Hashem, that the ways of God are straight. And justice and righteousness, this is a pasuk, justice and righteousness have to come together. And truth is important. And I can't hold back. They're all like sort of quasi quotes from Tanakh. That's how people wrote them. Mila avor et pi ohavi lahavi et kol advarim oela l'mechache shadvus. I cannot hold back to publish this. Manira komotze dat v'avinu kol darshai hayosher b'hatzedek, in order that everybody can see the righteousness of what he has written. Asher lo leman harbos kvodam. It's not for their own honor. It's got a malch b'malechas Hashem, asu sharia consultarium et asher asu. They did what the consultorium made the decision they did for good reasons. Bilti im b'mislul hanachon uva orach meishurim. It's true, it wasn't maybe the usual path that's used, maybe consulting with the right people, with more people. Darcha machodim nochachei nefesh halchu chom min mehem al adnei paz divrei shas v'poskim. But what they write is based in shas and poskim. Tzedek hema l'chol yishrei lev v'chol yakar ruach v'ish nachon yirah asher kol ya'asam v'chol cheftzam achlil mod livnei Yehuda. But Hashem, they're doing it for the right reasons. They want to teach fear and love of God. They want to stop there. They want to make sure there isn't argument. And I know my friend well. I know his heart. Tov mizago l'man asher yechaper ba'adi b'tfarsem dvarav. And I know that he will forgive me for publishing his words. Because I'm doing it for the right reasons. I want people to know the good things he's written in this book. And we'll keep them among us, the people of God. And Kibaladai Mispar. I'm not doing it to create any fight. אשר כך נפשנו לרשת איזה יחיד סגולה ראה אמיתי, כל השלב את כל הספרים הנתפסים, ידידי רב הגאון המחבר, עשה יעשה בהם את כל אשר יחלוץ וינעם השם. So basically he's trying to argue why he's publishing this. So, at first glance, you sort of think, well, that doesn't seem very nice. Like, why is he doing that? I guess that he sent it as a letter, didn't give him permissions. It's a good question. To what extent did he say, don't publish this? And what does that even mean? Somebody writes a halachic letter and says, lo the period. What's an interesting comparison to this is, have you ever seen, in 1979, there was a tshuva written by Rav Goren, the chief rabbi of Israel, about women's tefillah groups. And in it, and it's before like women's tefillah groups are becoming a big political thing. So there isn't any political pressure. So he just does it halachically. And he basically says 10 women, women's tefillah group could do everything. Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu. It's shocking and radical. But that's what he writes, because he's just doing it as a halachic analysis. And he basically bases it on the fact that women are allowed to create an obligation. They're not obligated to shake a lulav, but if they want to shake a lulav, they can. And Ashkenazic women are allowed to make a bracha. So he says if they want to daven, as a group, as 10, why can't they do divrei kedusha, which we usually assume they can't. So this, you can find this tshuva, but stamped on the top of it is lo lepirsum. This tshuva is not for public dissemination. But of course, everything is, now everything is public, but back then, maybe you could keep things hidden. So it's gutsy that he publishes it, but maybe we'll look at the content of it. And, I guess he didn't mean it to be only a private letter. It was on behalf of this consistorio, which was a government group. But what did it mean for something to be private but not published? That's an interesting thing. Or something to be known but not published. Okay. We'll do some more of this. So maybe we'll take a look at it. It's pretty short. It's about 10 teshuvot. There's some of them are just a paragraph, and most of it's about kidding. We won't spend that much time on that, but then he talks a little bit about reformations and prayer. Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you.